Joining me now, a woman on that congressional subcommittee that's investigating the origins of COVID. We have Representative Debbie Lesko, Republican from Arizona. Good to have you here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting. It's very important information. We need to get to the bottom of the truth.
Well, we do. And so many people don't want to still. We just played a clip of Anthony Fauci speaking with the Boston Globe last week saying, look, we may never know the answer. To which I'm like, well, yeah, you're not going to know the answer if you don't bother to do the investigation. Why is it that so many people were so quick, including Dr. Fauci, to totally dismiss the idea that maybe it might have come from the Wuhan lab?
I don't know for sure. I can guess. I can make an educated guess. I think that Anthony Fauci and the NIH director at the time, Francis Collins, were concerned that the American people would find out that U.S. taxpayer dollars were being used to fund EcoHealth Alliance, which in turn funded the Wuhan lab. And they're to this day denying that the grant funding was used for coronavirus research, even though other scientists believe that it is.
It was amazing how quickly, and I certainly experienced it as a journalist, just trying to dig in and get to the bottom of the story. I can tell you, Representative Lesko, I had sources as far back as January of 2020 and into early February, when apparently Anthony Fauci first learned of this, that were saying, look, it's possible. They didn't believe at the time, and I know there's conflicting reports on this as well, but they didn't believe it was deliberate. They believed that there was some kind of error that had happened at this lab. And so this was certainly out there among people at Treasury, state, in the so-called deep state, if you would. This thesis was out there, and yet it wasn't allowed to go anywhere. There was an effort by social media to shut it down. There was an effort, now we've learned, thanks to you and your subcommittee, by Dr. Fauci to shut it down. Walk us through some of those emails that lead you to believe he was somehow responsible for the initial big study, the big one that said, nah, no link here.
Well, we just recently had a roundtable in our select subcommittee on coronavirus. And we had three doctors, one from the Stanford School of Medicine, another from Johns Hopkins, and I forget where the third doctor was from. But they all believe that it is likely that it came from the lab. Now, Dr. Macquarie, who's from Johns Hopkins University, said he totally believes that it is from the lab, origin from the lab. He testified that two doctors from China were originally arrested and then told that they could not disclose any information about what was happening in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Then two U.S. Top virologists initially said that they believe that coronavirus came from the lab, but then days later said to the media that, oh no, it didn't come from the lab. And consequently, they received $9 million in NIH grant funds, which seems a little convenient. Also, I just find it unconscionable that the Chinese government, the Chinese scientists, contacted the National Institute of Health here in the United States and said, take down the sequences of what we were studying. And NIH did it. They deleted the sequences of what was being studied in the Wuhan lab. Now, we know that U.S. taxpayer dollars through the National Institute of Health and under the direction of Dr. Fauci and I believe Dr. Collins as well, who was the NIH director at the time, gave money to EcoHealth Alliance, a New York company. They gave a subgrant of that money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is the Wuhan lab, and other Chinese labs. And then all of a sudden, in the same area, within 5 miles of the Wuhan lab, we have an outbreak that killed 7 million people throughout the world. In China itself, they restricted travel within China, but yet allowed Chinese people to leave China internationally. They wouldn't report what was going on. But then we have emails that we've uncovered from Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci that basically said we need to tamper down this theory that there was a lab leak, and so now I totally don't know what to believe. The American people don't know what to believe because we were told one thing, then other information comes out. And when a government agency is giving money to the Wuhan lab, then all of a sudden there's a COVID outbreak within 5 miles of that lab. And they're kind of caught red-handed, like, why were you funding this? And then they retract what they say. Something very
suspicious. Yes.
Suspicious
no, listen. I mean, your point is heard. I mean, Representative, this has been the biggest challenge, I think, because in the era of social media, where people are trying to consume lots and lots of information, I'm just a big believer in, you got to be able to consume as much as possible and come to your own conclusions. But that somehow was just not allowed. And I think that's when you get into a situation where you really risk your entire system, because you got to have faith in the institutions that are governing you. And if your institutions are lying or trying to put some kind of cover up into effect, then the American people are left saying, as you just did, well, what the heck am I supposed to believe? Right. One of the concerns here I have is also, if we were given this money, and it sounds like we absolutely were, through EcoHealth, $600,000 has been reported of taxpayer dollars that was going to fund this research at the Wuhan Institute. What's shocking to me is that we know, right? Like, we know China's not necessarily the best in terms of safety records. It's one of the reasons why we don't love buying our pet food from China or other things from China, right? Like, that's just kind of a given. But also, Chinese state television, as far back as 2019, had even done a report on this particular lab and this particular woman who ran it, saying how brave she was. And in this report that was televised on state TV, no one's wearing the proper safety equipment. The Taiwanese actually went back and found this tape, so I credit them with that. But I'm like, okay, so we knew they weren't playing by the rules, so to speak. So why on earth would we ever encourage research at a place like that?
I don't understand. And that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And you are correct. The American people have lost their faith in our agencies, the CDC, the National Institute of Health. I have lost faith in our agencies. And quite frankly, I think somebody's lying. And it's hard to know who. So in the Energy and Commerce Committee hearing, of which I am the vice chair of the Oversight Committee, which also has jurisdiction over the National Institute of Health, I asked the NIH director specifically about the funding through EcoHealth to the Wuhan lab. He denied that any of the funding was used on research of coronavirus too. And I asked how he knew that, because on the one hand, he said they did not get the reports as was required under the grant, and they did not get the sequencing because the Chinese virologist asked them to delete it. And he continued to insist that the research that was done with the funding to EcoHealth had nothing to do with coronavirus 19. Then in the select subcommittee on COVID, I asked Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who is from the Stanford School of Medicine, if the sequences were deleted and we didn't get the reports from China, how would the NIH director know for sure that the funding that we gave to the Wuhan lab wasn't for coronavirus? And he said there is no way that the director could know that. Okay. So either one of two is true. Either the NIH director knows what's in the sequence before it was deleted, or and it had nothing to do with coronavirus, as he claims, or it possibly definitely could have been the coronavirus and he's covering it up. And I don't know which one is true.
Well, listen, we appreciate all the hard work you and the committee are doing. Keep at it, because America has answers. We want to know exactly what happened, no matter how bad the news is. I mean, we can take it. It's the truth that matters at the end of the day. So, Representative Lesko, we appreciate you joining us today. Keep it up and keep us posted.
Oh, I certainly will. This is very important, and we will get to the bottom of it one way or the other, although it's going to be difficult because China is not cooperating at all.
Thanks again, Representative Lesko.